The old wooden clock on the wall ticked steadily, its rhythmic sound filling the quiet, dimly lit room. The tiny house, worn by years of struggle, stood at the end of a narrow alley, barely noticed by the world outside. Inside, Maria sat in a rickety chair beside a small cot where her son, Daniel, lay sleeping. His frail body rose and fell with each shallow breath, his face pale under the flickering light of a single lamp. She brushed a few strands of hair from his forehead, her fingers rough from years of hard work, yet her touch remained as gentle as ever. For 20 years, Maria had cared for her only son, sacrificing everything to keep him alive. Daniel had been sick since he was a baby, his body too weak to run and play like other children. Doctors had long given up, saying there was nothing more they could do. But Maria refused to give up on him. She worked tirelessly, taking whatever job she could find, washing clothes, cleaning houses, even selling vegetables on the street, just to afford his medicines and a little food to keep them going. Every day was a battle, but she faced it with quiet strength, driven by the love only a mother could understand. The neighbors often whispered about Maria, shaking their heads in pity. She should send him away, they would say. She's wasting her life. But Maria never listened. She had promised herself that as long as she had breath in her body, she would be there for Daniel. He was her world, her reason for waking up each morning, no matter how exhausted she felt. That day had started like any other. Maria had left before sunrise for work, carefully covering Daniel with an old blanket before stepping out into the cold. Her heart ached every time she left him alone, but she had no choice. She needed the money. Hours passed as she scrubbed floors and carried heavy baskets, her body aching with every movement. She had learned to endure pain, to ignore the hunger in her stomach and the fatigue in her bones, because at the end of the day, everything she did was for Daniel. But today was different. Maria's employer had let her go early, saying there wasn't much work left. She hurried home, eager to see Daniel, to check if he had eaten, if he was feeling better. Her heart felt a little lighter at the thought of spending a few extra hours with him. She walked quickly through the alley, the familiar scent of damp earth and burning wood filling the air. The closer she got to her home, the more anxious she felt, an uneasy feeling settling deep in her chest. As she reached the door, she hesitated for a moment before pushing it open. The house was unusually silent. Normally, she would hear Daniel's weak voice calling out to her, or the sound of him shifting in bed. But now there was nothing, just silence. Her breath caught in her throat as she stepped inside, her eyes darting toward the cot. It was empty. A chill ran down her spine. She dropped the small bag of food she had brought, her heart pounding. "Daniel!" she called out, her voice trembling. She rushed to the bed, her hands frantically feeling the blanket. It was still warm. He had been there recently. But where was he? Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. He was too weak to walk far on his own. He had never left the house without her. Then, from the corner of her eye, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The back door was slightly open. Maria's hands shook as she reached for it, pushing it wider. The cool evening air rushed in, carrying with it a strange sense of dread. Outside, the alley stretched into darkness, the faint glow of streetlights barely illuminating the path beyond. She stepped out, her bare feet hitting the cold ground. "Danielle!" she called again, her voice desperate now. And then she heard it, a faint sound, almost like a whisper, coming from the shadows just beyond the alley. Maria's heart pounded against her ribs as she took a hesitant step forward. Was Daniel out there? Had someone taken him? 1,000 thoughts rushed through her mind, but one thing was certain. Something was terribly wrong, and she was about to find out what. Maria sat beside Daniel all night, her fingers wrapped around his fragile hand. Every now and then, she would touch his forehead, feeling for any sign that the fever was breaking. The medicine had steadied his breathing, but he was still weak, his body trembling under the thin blanket. She whispered prayers under her breath, begging the night to be kind, begging the morning to bring hope. The first light of dawn slipped through the cracks in the wooden walls, casting a soft glow over the small room. Daniel stirred, his eyelids fluttering. Maria held her breath, watching him anxiously. Then his eyes opened, just slightly, but enough for her to see the familiar warmth in them. "Mama," he whispered. Tears welled in Maria's eyes. She squeezed his hand gently, relief flooding her chest. "I'm here, my love," she murmured. "I'm right here." Daniel's lips curved into the faintest smile before exhaustion pulled him back into sleep. But this time, his breathing was deeper, more even. The fever was fading. He had made it through the night. Maria let out a shaky breath, pressing a trembling hand over her heart. She had been so close to losing him. The thought alone made her feel as if the world had nearly collapsed beneath her feet. But now there was hope. The hours passed slowly. Maria barely moved from Daniel's side, afraid that if she left him, something would go wrong. The only time she stepped away was to fetch some warm broth, gently spooning it into his mouth, making sure he swallowed. She saw color return to his pale cheeks, felt his fingers grip hers just a little stronger each time. By afternoon, the neighbors had heard what had happened. A few women stopped by, bringing small gifts, some bread, a little rice, an extra blanket. Maria, though exhausted, was deeply grateful. One of the older women, Senora Rosa, sat beside her with a kind but serious expression. "Maria, you cannot keep doing this alone," she said softly. "You need help." Maria knew the woman was right. She had spent 20 years carrying the weight of Daniel's illness on her own. But what choice did she have? Then, as if reading her thoughts, Senora Rosa reached into her pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. "The church is looking for someone to help in the kitchen. It won't pay much, but it's steady, and you won't have to work so far from home." Maria stared at the paper, her fingers tracing its edges. A steady job, something close to Daniel. It was more than she had dared to hope for. Tears stung her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Over the next few days, Daniel grew stronger. He still needed rest, still needed care. But for the first time in a long time, Maria allowed herself to believe that things might get better. She took the job at the church, working just a few streets away, and the kind sisters made sure she had enough to bring home for Daniel. One evening, as Maria sat beside Daniel, running her fingers through his hair, he looked up at her with quiet determination. "Mama," he said, his voice stronger than before. "One day, I'll take care of you." Maria smiled, brushing a tear from her cheek. "You already do, my love," she whispered. And as she held his hand, in their tiny home filled with love and quiet strength, she knew that no matter how hard life had been, no matter how many sacrifices she had made, she would do it all over again. Because love, true, unconditional love, was worth every moment.